Good day everyone, and welcome to one of the more simpler tutorials that I've done in a while. We're going to be making this fiber optic light background looking thing, which can be used for things like titles or just making something cool. Yeah, it's simple. I originally wasn't actually even going to do a tutorial on it, but a lot of people on Twitter were asking for it, so here you are, guys. So fiber optics, photographers are driven to them. They always look cool, and especially with depth of field, because you get these sort of light blooming effects, and you get some really amazing looking photos. And that's really why I was experimenting with the topic of this, because the photos just looked great, and so I wanted to do something like that in Blender. So anyways, this is of course what we're going to be making, and I'll show you the scene now. This is what it looks like in Blender. Not very pretty. It's essentially, it is a cylinder on a particle system coming out of a plane, and the material of the cylinder has this sort of fancy little setup, which is the majority of the work, and then the rest is just setting up the camera with the depth of field and everything like that. So if you're playing along at home, go ahead, open up a new scene now in Blender, and we will get started. I'll turn on the screen keys tool. All right, so go ahead now and delete everything, and we're going to start by adding in our first fiber optic, which is going to be a cylinder. Now you want to set the vertices of this down to 8, so something really small, because we're going to be using 1,000 of them. So just, you know, times that by 1,000, and that's how much your computer has to deal with. The radius, I'm going to use 0.1 millimeters. This will only work, by the way, if you're using the metric unit system. That's what I'm using now, so that's why I can type that in. And the depth, that's the height of it, I'm going to use 20 centimeters. So these are the measurements which I think is pretty accurate for sort of fiber optics. Okay, so we've got our nice cylinder here. Now, in the real world, fiber optics work by, it's essentially like a long plastic string, and then there's a light at the bottom which shines up through it, and then you get like, it sort of lights up the string, but most of the light comes out the tip here. So I tried to physically make that in Blender, and it did not go very well. It works slightly, but it's better to try and fake it. So that's what we're going to do, and it looks a lot better as well. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to try and get the effect of a slightly lit up what do you call it, length of the nylon tube. So if we go over to the node editor, we can go ahead and add in a new material, and we want it to light up, so it needs to be an emission shader. Go ahead and plug that in, and you can use any color you like. I'm gonna go with blue. Now if we were to give this a little render preview right now, you'd see a nice long blue thing, big solid blue tube. So one thing that, if you have a look at reference photos, you'll notice that it's a gradient effect. So it starts out bright at the bottom, it fades off towards the middle, and I noticed towards the tip of these little fiber optics, it sort of increases in brightness slightly again. So we want to try and create that effect using material nodes. So we can do that in our little material node setup over here by adding in something you might not have used before, which is a gradient texture. So this is a gradient texture. Now we need to map it to something. So if you add in a texture coordinates here, you can see we've got a number of different ones you could choose: generated, normal, object, etc. The only one that really works is UV. Okay, so we need to UV unwrap this cylinder, which is going to be very easy to do. This is basically just to tell Blender, you know, which way this gradient should go. So go into edit mode, hit project from view, and then you need to rotate this by 90 degrees. So it's going from left to right, because this is how the gradient is going to work. It's going to go from left to right like that. So you just want to scale this up just so that it fits that grid floor as best you can, something like that. Okay, so now that we've done that, back over here, it's connected to the UV. We can add in a color ramp node, and this will allow us more control over this gradient texture. Take the factor output of that, plug that into the color ramp, and then take the color of this, and then let's just put that into the strength, okay? Now, if this has worked correctly, we should see, there we go. You can see it's faded off at the bottom there, and it's increasing in brightness towards the top. We can also set the background to pure black so we can sort of see the effect a bit better. Okay, so it's working. That's good. So as I said, the tip is sort of bright. It fades off towards the middle, but it's brightest at the base. So right over here, I'm going to add in basically whatever, however bright you make these handles, that's how bright this color is going to be. This tip here is not as bright as the base, but it is still bright. Let's go 0.7, and the middle part here, let's go, you want to make it nothing, so let's go 0.1, like that. Maybe let's turn this up, maybe a little bit more. Okay, and then you want to set this to ease, just so that it's slightly smoother where these two parts collide, like that. So once you've got that, you're all right, you're doing fine. Now, one other thing to note when you have a look at reference photos, you will notice if you have a look very close up that it's not the entire tube which is lit up. It's not lighting up the entire thing. It's mainly just like the outer edge. So that is what you would call the Fresnel effect. Like that's because the nylon tube is refracting the light. So it's not lighting up the entire insides of it, but just the edges of it. So in Blender, we can sort of fake that by adding in a Fresnel node, right? So this is gonna do that effect for us. So the way this is gonna work, if I just plug this into the strength, you'll be able to see what it's doing. I'll just zoom in right here. There you go. You can see that it's lighting up the edges of our tube there. Okay, so that's the Fresnel effect in effect. At this point, by the way, I think we should add in the other shader. So along with the emission shader, it needs to be combined with a either transparent shader or something which will give you better results is a glass shader. The glass shader will increase render times, but it will give you better results. So just add that in with a mix shader, drag that across, and then connect the color to the factor input of those, and we should now have that gradient effect. Oh, flip them around if they're not going right. There we go, like that. Okay. And the index of refraction, by the way, for nylon, I actually looked it up. It's 1.55. Anyways. Okay, so with this Fresnel effect, we want to combine this with our gradient. So go ahead, add in a mix RGB node. And you want this here to actually darken this Fresnel effect. So essentially we're having two things here that are going to be factoring where the light is. The Fresnel combined with the gradient. So you plug this in to that input and set this to multiply and then turn that all the way up to 1. And you'll see immediately it's not as bright now, but if you zoom right in close, you will see that the edges are lighting up the way they're supposed to, and the gradient is also working, which means it is doing what we want it to. And if you increase this IOR, by the way, it'll just increase like how much of the edge is lit up. Like you can turn that way up until it's basically the entire thing lit up. But around about a 1.5 works pretty well. So we're going to go with that. And also you can increase the strength of the emission as well. That's one thing about this node setup which works really well, is that you've just got one emission shader right here which will define the brightness of the stems and that. So you can increase the brightness or change the color. It's very easy. All right, now one other thing before we get to the tip of the fiber optics is if you have a look at some reference photos, again, zoom in closely and you will see that there are little imperfections in the nylon tubing, like little bubbles and little nicks and things like that, basically there from the way it was created. So it does add quite a lot of realism, and this is really what it comes down to when you're making a scene is trying to focus on things that you wouldn't normally notice. So really having a close look at photos and thinking, how could I create that in Blender? So that's part of the process. That's what we're going to do right now. So to create that little bubbly effect, it's actually really easy to do. If we just add a noise texture, connect the noise texture to the object texture output so that each individual tube has a different noise texture applied to it. And we want to combine this with our multiply right here by using a mix RGB node like this. You want to connect this into the bottom input, and you want to set this to add, because this is going to add in, whoops, and use the factor, not the color, so that it's black and white. Okay, so this is now going to be added over the top of our setup already. I'm hoping this makes sense to you guys. Then, to see this, you want to turn the scale up to 5,000. So it's really small, and you can sort of see the noise effect there now. But now we're going to turn the contrast and the brightness up. So set the contrast to 5. So now you can actually really see that effect coming in there, and turn the brightness down. Something to around about minus 0.3. You don't want it to be over the top. Also maybe turn up the detail as well. That's pretty good. Okay, so probably a little bit too much, so just turn it down a little bit. Anyways, once you're happy with the amount of imperfections in it, you are now ready to go on with the tip of the fiber optic. So let's get to that. Jump out of the rendered view mode, and let's have a look at the top right here. Zoom in on these vertices. Okay, so we've got just this face right here. Then over in our material panel, whoa. I don't want to open the shelf. Move that across. Okay. Over in our material panel over here, we're going to add in another material. But first, let's just call the one that we just created, let's just call it main, just because it's the main one that we spent all our effort on. And let's call this second one tip. And this one is a lot easier to do. It's just an emission shader, which you can actually just select from this drop down here. And the strength of it, this is somewhat important when it comes to the depth of field. You'll really need to tinker with this to get a cool result. But I find a strength of 200 will really work well. And then you want to give it a nice color, basically the color of the tube as well. So a light blue color like that. And then you want to hit assign so that it assigns it to just that face right there. So you will now have two materials on this tube. In order to see that, let's first just go to the main material here, and then for the viewport color, just give it a light blue color like that. So there you go. So now the tip is got that material, and the rest of it's got the main. At this point, by the way, because we didn't do it at the start, you want to add smooth shading for our cylinder, and also to make sure that this edge at the top here is sharp, you can also add in an edge split modifier, but just set the split angle to 60 so that it is still smooth around the outside. So give this a little rendered view right now, and you have what looks like a fiber optic nylon tube like that. So that is one. Now we need 1,000 of them, which thankfully is pretty easy thanks to particle systems. So let's get into that. Add in a plane. Now the dimensions of this plane are somewhat important. I'm using, because of what I know works quite well for this, I'm using the dimensions of around about 30 centimeters for this plane here, and then we're going to use a camera. It's sort of important, and the reason I'm using real world dimensions is because the camera works best especially with depth of field, if you're using what is close to the real world. So these fiber optic things, usually about 30 centimeters like this, okay? Okay, so we've added in the plane. Now we're going to add in the particle system. Very easy to do. Set the type to hair, and you can leave the emission at 1,000 because that's actually the exact amount we need. One thing you do want to do is underneath render, you want to set the object to cylinder. And once you've done that, check rotation, which does not have any effect. Now, for some reason, Blender does this. You need to rotate whatever object it is that you want to be coming out of this plane. You need to rotate it by 90 degrees from the side angle. So you rotate this like that, then hit Control A and apply the rotation. And now you should see, if we go to Advanced, and where we've got rotation here, set this to normal. That didn't work. Maybe uncheck rotation. There we go. Anyways, now we've got them coming out of our particle system there, out of our plane. And I want to set the size to be 0.25, which is pretty close to its actual length that we had there, which was 20 centimeters, okay? So we've now got a whole bunch of them coming out of there. Now let's go ahead and start positioning the camera. So we don't have a camera yet because we deleted everything at the start. So let's add in a camera right here, okay? And then go into front view mode, position the camera about there, hit Control Alt number pad 0, and the camera snapped to it. Awesome. So now this is really where a lot of the, I don't know what you would call it, fun, if you can call it that, but the experimentation of this scene will really come into the position of the camera, as well as the placement of all of these little particles, right? These little tubes. So first of all, back at our particle system here, set the distribution to be random, because it should be pretty random. And as well as that, you also want to give it a little bit of a random amount, just so that they're not entirely straight, but they're slightly, you know, coming out at a little bit of an angle. So something like that, I guess, is pretty good. And then also give them a randomized size as well. I think a value of about 0.03 is pretty good. You'd think that these tubes would be about the same length, but if you have a look at reference photos, often the tubes are not exactly the same length. So having a randomized size does actually work for us. Okay, so from the position of the camera, you may notice that you're not seeing the tops of these tubes here. And actually, it's pretty hard to really see anything. So one thing you need to do, and this is something that I didn't realize until very later on in this experimentation, is with your camera selected, you might not know it, but there's clipping at the start of the camera. So anything that is closer than 10 centimeters to the camera is automatically clipped. So instead of that, I'm going to use a clipping distance of 1 millimeter. So now you can actually see the tops of our little tubes there. Awesome. So we've got the camera here. Let's go ahead and give this a name, save it in case it crashes, and then let's go ahead and render it and we'll see what we get. Ta-da! Awesome. So it's coming out pretty well. Now what we want to do is we want to add in a little bit of variation, so maybe make these tubes not all exactly straight, and as well as that, we want to add in the depth of field and the placement of the tubes. So first of all, the placement of the tubes is quite important, because currently it's all over the field, and we want there to be less at the back, more at the front, and we want there to be a place of focus. So we do that by using weight painting. So if you hit Control Tab, this is where you would do your weight painting, but you need geometry or vertices to actually paint anything. You can't really paint anything with just 4 colors like this, right? So go back into, go to edit mode, hit subdivide, and say for the number of cuts, let's go 100 cuts, okay? And with that, we can now, if we set the weight to be 0, the strength to be 1, now I can just paint wherever I don't want there to be these tubes. Now, you can see where the camera is right now and the way where its field is, like its angle of view. So the reason that I'm getting rid of the ones to the left and right hand side of the camera is because although it's not visible to the camera, it will still affect your render times if you have particles or anything out of view. So that's an important thing to note if you're doing anything to do with particles, grass as well. You want to paint things out that aren't directly in the camera view, and it'll lower your render times. So once we've done that, you want to make that that vertex group applied to our particle system. So down here under the particle settings, you've got vertex groups. Set that to group, and there we go. So it's now all appearing in the one place. Excellent. So now with that, I'm going to have a little bit more fun. Let's set the strength down to 0.5 like that. And I'm going to start painting the background away, because I noticed that it works best at the background. It can sort of look all bunched up with the depth of field and that, so you don't really need that many particles in the background there. So something a little bit patchy like this, and also in the front here, I find if you can sort of separate whatever's going to be in focus, which is actually where my 3D cursor is right now, so that there's a foreground, what's in focus, and then the background. If you have them all too close together, it can sort of look a little bit too muddled. So really this is a matter of experimentation. This is how I really learned all this. It's not like something you are expected to know just off the top of your head. This is just one of those projects where you just experiment with results and you find what works. So something like this should produce some cool results. And then just in the foreground here, just cut sort of a little bit of a pathway so you can sort of see the center there a little bit. Okay, awesome. All right, so now we want there to be something that is in focus, something that the camera is focusing on. So for that, very easy to do, I'm just going to use an empty. You could use any object, but an empty is easy because you can just place it and it never shows up in a render. So something right there, right in the center. And then with our camera selected, down here in depth of field, way down at the bottom, you've got focus. So this is where you're going to select empty for which to be focused on. Now the aperture, this is really important. Okay, now I like to use f-stop because that's what the physical camera uses, but radius will have the same effect. You just increase that and that's more depth of field. Anyway, f-stop, the lower you set this number to, the more depth of field, like the more out of focus things will appear. So I've experimented with values of like 1 all the way up to 7 or 8, and it really depends on the scale of your scene and other factors like that, but really you just want to experiment with it. I'm going to leave it at 5.6 right now, and we're going to do a render, but you'll notice immediately that you'll need a lot of samples once you start adding in this heavy depth of field. Cycles does get really noisy with the depth of field. For my final render, I used, I think, 2,000 samples. So let's just try 1,000 samples, okay? Which will probably take a little while, depending on how good your machine is. I'm gonna render it now, and I'll show you what it looks like once it's finished. And we're back. That took about 4 minutes on my my 2 graphics cards, so it will be fairly intense. And you can see it's still noisy with 1,000 samples. So this is really where you need to crank it up. I don't know, maybe I used like 4,000 samples for my final one. I don't know. But it gets a little bit unseemly, the amount of samples you have to use. At this point, what you'd want to do is really just play around with everything. Like, you can have a look, having a look at this, you can see it's a little bit jumbled up. There's nothing that's really getting your focus, nothing that is like clearly like, this is what I need to look at, it's all just like a bunch of random dots, which you don't want. You want there to be a place which your eyes can settle on. So really, this is where I would just play with the weight painting like this, and just add in like a clear spot like that, and then maybe cut away some of this noisy stuff in the background here a little bit, so that it's not quite as taking your attention away from this spot, right? Okay, so something like that. Okay, and then I just give it a re-render essentially. You know what? I'm going to give it 2,000 samples this time, and we'll just take this final result, and then we'll do a little bit of post-processing on it. So go ahead, give it another render, and we'll see how we go from there. And 8 minutes later, we have this, which is a mild improvement over the last one because it's a little less noisy, and there's a little more clarity, but you really want the focus to be on like this spot right here or any spot, but it's still, you got a little, some stuff in the way which is sort of distracting you. But that's again where you would sort of play around with it. Now I was going to jump straight over to doing the After Effects, or the post-processing, if you call it that. But I just realized we didn't make these strings look bendy. They're all straight, which is a problem because it looks kind of like a camera effect that went wrong. Like, they're all just perfectly straight, and the fiber optic things, they're not actually that straight in real life. So we want them to be slightly bendy. So the way you would do that, because it is an actual object that we're doing, we can't use any hair effects by making it bend. So we actually need to take our original cylinder here, move it to another layer just so we can focus on just that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a duplicate of it, like that. And then I'm going to add in a bunch of loop cuts, right? And this is going to allow us to add some detail, like to make it bendy, all right? So something like that. And then I'll just duplicate it a couple more times. And now we're just essentially going to make it look bendy. So turning on proportional editing by hitting O, and you can use smooth like that. And you just want to move this around just ever so slightly, not too much. Maybe just grab the tip here, go sharp, and pull that back. So we're just making it look, somewhat, somewhat, bendy, like a real thing, real piece of string. Okay, so something like that. Okay, so once you've got, a bunch that you actually like, go ahead and hit Control G, and that has now formed a group. Now you can give it a name if you want over there in the toolbar. I already made a group name before, so it's reusing it. I'll just call it Fibers. And going back to our particle system here, we now want to make it use that group instead of the original cylinder. So where it's got render, instead of object, just hit group and just select the name of your group. I have 2 there because I messed up the recording. But anyways, that's it. So now, it's now using those randomly all throughout the thing.
which looks, if you have a look at it from here, a lot better. And also the cool thing, if you go up to rotation, you can, if you increase this random amount, then they're all rotated at like random intervals. So it will, it'll look a lot better. So at this point, basically, it's just a matter of just cleaning it up, and trying to get a nice sort of clearer looking image. And I'm going to give it one final render, and then we're going to do some post-processing.
All right, well, that is as good as that is going to get. So at this stage, you could jump over to the compositor and add like some little glare effects maybe on the highlights. I won't do that because I know you guys already know how to do it. I've done it all the time in my other videos. Add a vignette, something like that, and then you'll end up with something like this. Isn't that a stark difference? I'll show you how to just essentially make this look a little bit, I don't know, a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. For one, we've only got one color at the moment, so it would help if we have a color like a hot purple right here. I'm using Photoshop, by the way, for this, right? So you just add a new layer, and then, oh, whoops, I was using the Blender hotkey for making the brush size bigger. You just add in like some little color spots, you know? Like maybe one here as well, like something down there, right? And then maybe add in a little bit of aqua as well. If you followed my video last week on color theory, then you'll know that I'm using an analogous color scheme here. So using colors that are next to each other on the color wheel, which can give some pleasing results. And then, yeah, basically once you've got something like this, then you take this layer and make that apply to the hue of the scene, like that. And then you just turn that down or up, depending on how much of that effect you want. You could also just leave it as normal, and that'll give you another sort of effect. You know, something like that kind of makes it look like it's sort of glowing a little bit. I mean, or you can even just like go full, as they say, full retard, and just make it all rainbow colored by using a gradient effect like this. So that's how you can kind of make something that looks sort of cool. So that pretty much concludes this tutorial, guys. It is a simple one, but I'm hoping maybe you guys can do something cool with it. Maybe make a little animation, use it in a title screen or something like that. It just looks cool. And so there you go. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.